Hello, this is a series of 4 lectures where you're gonna see jQuery, JavaScript library. But before that, part number 1 or lecture number 1 is a very short one, and we're gonna see what do we mean by, or what are the libraries, what are JavaScript libraries, what are they for, and what are the JS or JavaScript frameworks. So, library and frameworks are just not your code. It's a third-party code. So your own code you write usually in plain JavaScript, or what we call vanilla JS. There's no use of any third-party library to interact with your browser. So no need for the web APIs. Your plain JavaScript code interacts with the browser environment directly. So as I told you, there's no API, there's no interface from the third-party code. An application is third-party dependent when it uses an external library or framework. It depends on code that is beyond its control, of course. So you're going to use some API that are not your own, but they belong to some other people or some other companies. So libraries and frameworks, this third-party code. The main goal here is to simplify the developer task of coding. So they will give you some code that are not the main functionality or the main requirement of your application or the application you are developing. So the developer will focus on his or her core tasks or main business logic, and anything that is peripheral, they can bring it from the third-party code, a framework, for instance. So, for instance, many applications needs a login, and it's almost the same code, it's the same interface, and so on. So you might be using a framework to give you that part of your application. And there are thousands of JS libraries and frameworks today, and some of them they fall in and out of fashion. The one that is really resisting or has resisted a lot is jQuery, kind of becoming like a standard. Okay, there is a sarcastic article that I want you to read, okay, to give you a glimpse of a front-end developer and the difficulty we are facing with this new or these hundreds of libraries. So now we talk about this third-party code that are library and frameworks, but what are they exactly? What is the difference between a library and a framework? Well, let's define a library first. So library is, you have been using library, I mean your own. Remember when you create the folder utilities and you put all the functions there. Some functions that are very useful, and you may use them from one project to another one, like cross browser compatibility and so on, like cookies. So these are libraries, or good examples of libraries. So they provide objects, functions, and coding tools. They are API, application programming interface. So you're gonna call them in your main project and use them. Then in another project, when you create a new project, you're gonna reuse them. So libraries, guys, it's about code reuse. So jQuery is a very good example of a JavaScript library. It's one, if not the most popular JavaScript library. So jQuery is, for example, developed or designed for manipulating DOM. We have other JavaScript libraries, for example, maps. For maps, we have Leaflet, that's an example. Unicode strings manipulation, we have Panicode, which is very popular. Generating shapes, visualizing data, we have Processing.js, D3.js, and so on. React is also very famous for creating user interfaces. Now a framework, also third-party code that you may use All right. So a framework is not like it's not a library. It's more than that. It's an MVC, model view controller. It's a pattern design. It's like an unfinished system where you have holes, but you have some structure there. And what you do as a programmer, you're gonna fill in the holes with your own code that model your own or the business the your own requirements or the business logic that you are designing for your application. So it really has a structure and a flow, and it just present you with that structure and the flow, and you have to plug in your own requirements there. When I say requirements, means you code the requirements. So you provide the code that the framework can call to fill in the gaps. There are two very popular here, I'm mentioning here, MVCs, okay, Model View Controller, or the JavaScript framework, Angular and Ember. Now, the importance of JavaScript fundamentals. Now, some people, they learn a little bit of JavaScript, then they shift directly to libraries and framework to be very efficient. They think they are very efficient because they're gonna speed up the development, but it's very extreme, or if not extremely important, to have a sound understanding and knowledge plus experience with the plain JavaScript. Once you have this hardcore skills or coding skills, you can implement custom behavior that aren't necessarily provided by any library. Sometimes you can really browse all the libraries and you won't find anyone that is doing something that you need to implement. So you have to rely on yourself. So if you are not knowledgeable and have a good experience in JavaScript, you will fail. You can code your own libraries or frameworks. Remember, you are coding your utilities, your cookies, your cookies management of cookies. What else? Cross-browser compatibility. You can also evaluate whether it's worth implementing a solution yourself versus using one that already exists. Maybe the one that already exists is not fully fledged or doesn't really answer all your requirements, or it cannot be really adapted, so you have to create your own. You can extend and customize also some of your needs. You can debug the library easily. You can understand, of course, how it works by debugging it, and you can evaluate the pros and cons, which is the topic of this couple of slides. Now, the advantages and disadvantages of using a library and or a framework are the following. So we start with the advantages. Saves you a hell of a time. In order to reinvent the wheel, you're gonna spend more time. So better use from the shelf, if you like, a code ready to use that has been tested thoroughly and probably written by some experts. So it's good. Focus on the overall logic of your project. So you don't have to really think about recurrent designs. You're gonna really spend all your effort on the business logic, okay, the core task of your application. Other stuff you can just use libraries to code them very, very quickly. The code might look simpler, easier to read, because the library abstracts away implementation details. For instance, if you bring a manage cookies library, so in one of the API it could be mycookie.delete. So you don't have to look at what the code is there. I mean, inside. If you have to write it, you have to create a date and create a date of yesterday or an earlier date and set your cookie with an earlier date. That are the details. But with the library, you might have just called mycookie.delete. The library likely provides a more robust solution. Experts developing in those libraries. jQuery is really, as an example, is really exhaustive cross-browser compatibility. your own project code ends up being cleaner, easier to read and maintain. Why? Because your code contains only the main functionality, and other things you are just calling or using library. So it's shorter. Now, the disadvantages of using a third-party code: all the library code has to be downloaded by the client when your application loads. This can be inefficient, takes time and resources. If, for example, you are developing, you need only one task from that library, instead of downloading the whole library that is really big and does many things, so it's really unwise to download the whole library for one tiny task. Why not developing that tiny task yourself? So the library itself may have bugs as well, and these bugs may be harder to identify. You might be unlucky that the library has been used by many people 100 times, 1,000 times, never bumped into a bug, but your luck with your application, you bump into some bugs. Debugging can be harder. You have to understand how the library handles errors. You have to learn how to use that library's API. Sometimes learning the API of the library can take more time than developing your own solution. Now, question to ask when trying or deciding on whether to use or not a third-party code. So these are a bunch of questions that you have to ask yourself before you decide on using or not using the library or the third-party code. Is it well supported? Is it active in active development, or it has been abandoned and it's stagnant? Does it have a good documentation? Do you have some people or users in the community who can answer your questions? You have to think about the licensing issues. Are they, or will it be compatible with your own software, the license of your own software that you are developing? Does it provide a good cross-browser and accessibility support? How easy is it? How flexible is it if you want to extend it to meet your extra needs, for instance? All right, so that's it for introduction to third-party framework, JS frameworks and libraries. And in the next lecture, we're gonna start with the jQuery, one of the most popular JavaScript library.